Thanks for checking out this movie review video. So this is for the 1992 film Candyman. Yes, it's the original Candyman. And no, before people start asking, I have not seen the remake yet. I will eventually, but with newer films, especially remakes, I usually wait a little bit because I'm going to want to review them, and I don't want to just put out a review when most likely there are an insane amount of reviews for it out there. So I'm going to give it some time. But I do have interest in seeing it for sure. Do I think it's going to be as good as the original? Probably not. Most reboots don't even come close, and I expect that that will probably still be the case. But let's get into this one. I do want to say, though, this one is very dense. This is one of the ones I've been putting off for a while covering just because a lot of thought and work were going to go into it, and it did. So I'm going to dive really deep into this. So for that reason, I'm not going to talk as much about the events of the film, although I will do some of that up front. And then at the end is where I'll put like the really dense, more analytical stuff for this film. So just know that. And it might get kind of dense at the end. Hopefully I can verbalize things the way I want to, and hopefully people end up enjoying this. But also, disclaimer, obviously I am a white male, so there are different perspectives for watching this film that I can only perceive through myself what my perspective is. So there are perspectives that I probably am missing. And for that reason, I more than encourage people to make comments down here and tell me, what do you see in the film? How do you like it as well? We can talk about that. But also subscribe. That's another thing. Shameless plug. Subscribe to the channel, and also hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know when I'm putting out videos like this. So hopefully you enjoy it, and excited to dig into Candyman. Oh, which, by the way, I do need to say, this is the Shout Factory Blu-ray. I picked this up on sale last year at one point for, I think, like $10. Wonderful deal for a film of this quality. And I watched the director's cut, which is the unrated cut. And for some reason, they put the theatrical cut and the director's cut in here. So, if the director's cut slash unrated cut is available, you always watch that, right? So that's the one I was watching. Anyway, this film was written and directed by Bernard Rose, who did films Smart Money, Body Contact, Paper House, one of the versions of Anna Karenina, and a form of Frankenstein, which has been tons of Frankenstein stuff done. Just a smattering of some of his films. Based on the story, obviously, by Clive Barker. It was called The Forbidden, and this is coming actually 2 years. This film comes 2 years after Clive Barker had made his film Nightbreed, which is also from his writings, and I think the book was called Cabal, but he actually directed Nightbreed. This was also 2 years after Tony Todd starred in Tom Savini's remake of Night of the Living Dead, which has had a resurgence in popularity kind of within the last decade or so as people start to realize, hey, this was actually a pretty good remake. Savini notoriously doesn't really want to talk about it anymore because when it came out, it got panned really hard, and it's just a sore spot for him, so I get it. Tony Todd was stung 26 times during the filming of this film, but had worked into his contract that he would get $1,000 per sting. Now, I actually heard him talk about this on on Postmortem podcast with Mick Garris, which if you haven't listened to that podcast, definitely do. Specifically listen to the Tony Todd interview, because he is a fascinating guy. He's a great actor, and his roots in acting are very interesting to hear him talk about, and also like his acting passions. Really cool guy, really interesting guy. Still getting a lot of work, obviously. His voice, super iconic, and I think he really sells Candyman super well. And I think that's part of the reason a lot of people have a tendency to not want to see the remake, because they're like, it won't be Tony Todd, and he is Candyman. It happens all the time, like Robert Englund and Freddy Krueger, or Doug Bradley and Pinhead. Like, people have a problem with that just because they want to see it the way it was. But hey, things move on. Director Rose had Virginia Madsen and Tony Todd apparently take ballroom dancing classes to kind of increase their chemistry for the scenes they would have together. I find that an interesting method. I've heard of other methods of directors kind of getting actors to bond before shooting a film, and I guess that was just the idea that Rose had to make that happen. It is reported that Virginia Madsen passed on the role of Helen initially, or I'm sorry, that if she had passed on the role, that it was going to go to Sandra Bullock, who is actually a relative unknown at this point. So it makes you kind of think when you hear these types of things, what would the film have been like with Sandra Bullock as Helen instead of Virginia Madsen? I don't know. I don't think it would have been as good personally because I'm not that big of a fan of Sandra Bullock's acting, and I think Virginia Madsen did a very good job in this film. I actually think in general, like the film's acting is wonderful. A lot of great actors in this did great jobs, and the directing looks really good. So from a technical standpoint, it's really really nice. Directing, cinematography, excellent acting, excellent. The lighting is done very very well. The editing was really good. The cuts are nice. It looks really good. Also, apparently, I can't confirm this, but I had read somewhere that Eddie Murphy was apparently considered for the role of Candyman. Now, that doesn't mean he was super seriously considered, but he was considered, supposedly. There are claims that Virginia Madsen was hypnotized in certain scenes, and apparently this came from things she said. I don't know if that's actually true or not. Seems like a kind of weird thing to do, but you know, there was the ballroom dancing thing that Rose wanted done, so I don't know. Maybe he did try and hypnotize her for some of the scenes. It was apparently for the scenes that went when she was supposed to kind of be like under the trance or like control of Candyman. A lot of care was actually taken to work with the bees in this because yes, it's actual bees for the most part. Around 200,000 bees used for this. They had an actual bee wrangler because obviously for a number like that you need an actual bee wrangler. And apparently they needed the bees to be like a certain age. Like they needed to be a certain number of weeks old because then their stings wouldn't be as serious when it happened. But so I mean that's good for anyone who was working with it. But also Tony Todd was getting paid more, so good for him. This takes place at the housing project called Cabrini Green. It's a notoriously failed public housing project that was poorly built, not properly maintained, and became rife with activity, gang activity, drugs, and violence. I think it was torn down in 2011. I actually did read an article, like an actual article written about Cabrini Green and how it was originally started and what happened with it and everything. I would recommend people looking that up because it is a very important part of this film, and there's a lot of information out there about it. Not just looking up like a Wikipedia or something like that, but reading like a real article, like a journalistic piece of work about Cabrini Green and its significance. Really terrible housing project in Chicago that deservedly was taken down for many, many, many reasons. I'll end up talking about it a decent amount within this review. So the opening aerial shot slowly moving down the highway is a very interesting initial visual for the film. And when it cuts over to the bees, that hive of bees, this is basically equating Chicago and all the people inside of Chicago with a hive, kind of like a hive mentality. And if you think about that, bees, the majority of them, are kind of mindless drones who just serve at the behest of the queen. So they're just kind of going around just doing their jobs kind of mindlessly. And that kind of happens with people. And I think that's kind of what they were trying to do in the beginning, is showing a busy highway of people driving all over the place and all these buildings, and then move it over to the hive to kind of equate humans with the bees as well, societally. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it looked visually very appealing. Candyman's voiceover is very creepy in the beginning and sets a very great stage for the horror aspect of the film and what kind of horror is to come. It gives this kind of ominous feeling to start everything off, and it works really, really well. It then goes to Helen recording a tale of the urban legend of Candyman, which establishes her interest in following this story. It gives you the idea of who she is a character immediately and what path she's going to be going down. Of she's very interested in this particular urban legend, and she's going to follow it as far as she can with a very journalistic focus, which is usually very, very focused and very rabid, like definitely going after everything, trying to, turn over every single stone when it comes to that story. Even though Helen is researching Candyman, she also treats him and the lore around him as entertainment to a degree. This is best seen when she says the final recitation of his name in the mirror when she's trying to invoke him with her friend Bernadette. She stares her reflection down with a look of boldness, which seems to be an antagonistic call to Candyman. It's this moment of her, she's already established because she said that like she thinks it's basically just lore, like it's myth, and she kind of wants to debunk it as such because it seems that people are kind of living their lives like it's real. So you have that aspect of things of her being set up that way, and then you see her kind of trying to laugh in the face of it when she's doing the Candyman recitation of the name 5 times in the mirror, which apparently the recitation of the name was like 30 sometimes in the original story that Clive Barker did. Oh, and actually to also note, the way the script was written for this is very different than what Clive Barker's initial story was. Rose definitely changed this a lot and made it what he was looking for it to be, which ended up being really, really good. Helen and Bernadette being hassled by people who are perceived to be gang members outside of Cabrini Green creates an extra feeling of danger for those particular characters. So we already know the established danger in the beginning of Candyman because he seems real based off of the voiceover in the beginning, because why are you hearing his voice already at that point? You haven't even been introduced to any characters, so that gives you the idea that he is legitimate. Then you have this real world danger that's being perceived of these people who don't want, just don't want Helen poking around in general. Like, even if they don't know, if they do or don't know that she's, working on this urban legend, some people know it and they want her to stay away because they're like, don't mess with Candyman. He will murder you, basically. You don't want to get that deep. And some people are just like, we just don't want you poking around. We don't trust you. We don't want you just walking in here. You're an outsider for sure. And you're suspicious just walking in here like this. So those guys hanging out and kind of hassling them a little bit is kind of like an added danger that's showing it's not just Candyman as a danger. There are other people who pose a threat potentially to this character. The shot of Helen in the mouth of the wall art of Candyman shows that she will be consumed by him in many ways. The lore around him, and in the end, basically consumed by what he does to her. He takes control of her life, and I'll talk more about that later. But it's a beautiful visual of her inside of his mouth, that piece of artwork. But it's foreshadowing as well. And I love when she just like steps through it, and then you see like the full thing. Very, very cool moment. And I know a lot of people, when they think of the film, they think of that moment. Rightfully so. The inclusion of Anne-Marie as a character is to show someone just trying to get by in life, but having no option but to live in a very tough place. Tough place being Cabrini Green. So she is one of those big sympathetic characters who's shown to be like, look, there are sympathetic characters who are going to be in this place. It's one of those moments of just showing someone who is there against their will, basically, and just trying to make it, and she's just trying to protect her baby too, which obviously becomes a problem later on because she loses her child. I think the kid's name was Anthony. The cut between Helen and Bernadette talking to Anne-Marie at Cabrini Green to them having dinner at a high-class restaurant with other intellectuals shows a stark socioeconomic divide. That's meant to be, here is a lower socioeconomic housing project where people are just trying to get by. Here is Helen and Bernadette kind of doing their work there, and then fast forward, they're at a high-class restaurant. They get to step out of that environment and enjoy some luxuries in life while they've left these other people behind who don't have that ability. They can't just walk out and go to a high-class restaurant because you're assuming because they're living at Cabrini Green socioeconomically, they don't have the money to do something like that, and they may not even be accepted into the establishment because of things like racism. So, the story of Candyman is heartbreaking and highlights how a white man wanted him to create art for him, but became violently enraged when he actually entered his life by sleeping with his daughter. It's one of those things. It's a story that's introduced to give you not just the backstory of how Candyman came to be, which is important, but also make you sympathize with Candyman and the origin of Candyman and show you that racism is the impetus for how Candyman became Candyman. The event happened because of racism, because this man reached out to Candyman in his normal life, who was a great artist, as they say, and wanted him to paint a picture of his daughter. He did so. He got close with the daughter. They had a relationship. He impregnated her. And then the father was enraged because he's like, I asked you to come into my life briefly to do a piece of art for me. I don't want you as a part of my actual life, as a part of my family because of racism. And then he was murdered for that. So there you go. It equates the creation of Candyman and the Candyman lore and Candyman himself as a product of racism. The man Helen comes across in the bathroom with the hook is obviously using Candyman lore to instill fear and hold power within Cabrini Green, as Candyman does. Like, you see even further down, there's actually a quote from Candyman that he basically says that he's trying to keep Helen from convincing people that he's not real because he needs them to believe in him to maintain his control, to maintain his power, which I'll talk a little bit more about what the significance of that is later. But you see this individual in the bathroom who beats up Helen using that. He's trying to use that as well and being like, well, people fear and listen to the lore of Candyman, so if I kind of embody that, I will get that power and that level of control. Helen comments on how messed up it is that the police only care when she, a white woman, is attacked at Cabrini Green, but don't do much when people who live there are brutally murdered. Yes. Now, obviously, that changes when she is put into the situations that Candyman threw her into, although some people can probably argue that there isn't an actual Candyman in this, and she actually did those things. She had like a psychotic break, but I don't think that's the case, but I know some people could argue that. But yes, very important point of how people are treated because of their skin color, because of their socioeconomic status, because of where they live, which is tied into the socioeconomic status when it comes to something like Cabrini Green. So yeah, it's a big point. It's very creepy and scary when Candyman appears to Helen and says, "Be my victim." I know that's a line that a lot of people cite when they think of this film, and it's very impactful. It's very creepy. It's very scary. And it gives you an idea of where things are headed because she becomes a victim of everything that Candyman sets up for controlling her life after that and leading her to her downfall and eventual death. The situation Candyman puts Helen in seems impossible for her to get out of. I think we can all agree with that. It seems very impossible for her to get out of there when she, wakes up covered in blood with a hatchet and there's a dog missing its head, and then she gets into an altercation with Anne Marie and the baby's missing, and you're there when the police barge in, covered in blood, holding a hatchet on top of Anne Marie. Like, how do you get out? How do you get out of that? You're trapped. And that's the moment that Candyman has taken control of her life. He's put her in a situation that she can no longer do anything about, really. Candyman's hook popping through Helen's medicine cabinet is a very effective jump scare. I love that jump scare. It's probably one of the best jump scares I've seen in a film, to be honest. It works so well. I really was actually kind of lulled into this feeling of, oh, she's just kind of thinking about things, reflecting, and then pow, that hook comes through and you're just like, holy crap. It got me. It's great. Especially because I haven't seen this movie in years, so I didn't remember that. Candyman taking Anne Marie's baby is him trying to assert his dominance over another generation within Cabrini Green. There are comments that Anne Marie initially makes about wanting to kind of protect her child and make sure that she's like, they're not going to get him. They're not going to get him. And she's alluding to Candyman not getting him, but it's also alluding to that lifestyle, that kid having to fall into that same lifestyle. She wants to create a different life for a new generation there. And Candyman has taken him in order to try and force the same life and the same systemic issues onto that child as a, symbol of the entire generations, multiple generations as they've lived there. If you assume Candyman isn't real, Helen really does appear to be off the deep end. I will just throw that out there. That's just an exercise I did while I was watching. I was like, what if I just do an exercise where where I look at it a little bit like she, it's all in her head. And then you consider the events, kind of edit out all the Candyman stuff and consider the events of what's going on. And it seems like she's off the deep end. It really, really does. But like I said, I don't think that's what's going on. The death of Dr. Burke is a very nice bloody surprise. that maybe some people didn't see coming. I did kind of see it coming when I initially saw the film, but the payoff is still so good that it doesn't matter. When Candyman tells Helen, quote, "the pain will be exquisite," this kind of invokes Pinhead a little bit, the character Pinhead from Hellraiser, which makes sense because obviously that's another Clive Barker character from his books and from the Hellraiser film that he directed. So, yeah, I like that kind of like connection that you end up feeling if you're familiar with both the films. So I like that. You get the idea the fire being set to the pile that Helen climbs into is actually commanded by Candyman. Having the fire set is being commanded by Candyman. Then they have the shot of towering Cabrini Green from the top that then goes down. And then the masses of people are kind of walking out of it. This kind of shows Candyman as being equated with the building of Cabrini Green itself, as it like towers over in a commanding way over the mass of people who live within it. So I think it's symbolically a very important shot in the film, and it works really, really, really well. And it drives the idea that Candyman is controlling them. Cabrini Green is controlling them. And Cabrini Green controlling them in the sense that they're living there because it's public housing. It's a public housing project because they are socioeconomically low on the ladder within Chicago. So they're stuck there. Like and being in a lower socioeconomic position dictates your life, what you can do, what you cannot do. So there's control there. After Helen dies saving the baby, the residents of Cabrini Green show up to her funeral, showing they accept her almost as one of their own because she sacrificed for them when most people who were white people would not sacrifice for them. Obviously, it's kind of a point in there that the police aren't really doing a whole lot to help out with, especially the unsolved murders that go on there. So when someone, especially someone who doesn't look like these residents, shows up and actually does something, sacrificing her life to help someone who lives there, a baby who lives there, it means a lot. It's more than a symbolic gesture of reconciliation for one person. In the end, you realize Trevor denied everything Helen learned and worked for to maintain his comfortable lifestyle with a woman who also has no interest in challenging socioeconomic norms and just living life blind to the fact that racism is a thing, blind to the fact of these divides of socioeconomics and the issues that are created therein. Because really, I mean, the whole time Trevor is very blasé about what Helen is working on, and as she gets deeper into the lore of Candyman, he's detaching from her more and more, and you realize that he was actually cheating on her the whole time. So because she's becoming less comfortable with her comfortable life and diving further into the lives of people who don't have as comfortable a life, he's disconnecting from her. And he's looking for another woman who will just give him what he had before of just, hey, this is how it is. Let's accept it because we're doing well. And we just want to keep doing well. So that really comes full circle at the end. And you see it. And then that's why when he says Helen's name repeatedly in the mirror, he gets his. Okay, so now is the very dense stuff, and I do have a lot to say, and I'm going to read it verbatim because I was very careful with my wording in my notes. So I'm not probably going to elaborate too much past it, but I'll go relatively slow though because some of it's dense. Trevor states, quote, "These are the unconscious reflections of fears of urban society." This is when he's talking about it in the beginning when he's first introduced in his classroom, talking about urban legends in general. "These are the unconscious reflections of fears of urban society." This cuts to the heart of the film. People brush urban legends off as just scary stories, but the root of how they start is based on a societal issue, at least one, sometimes multiples. Because if you think about a horror film in general, it's said that it's always kind of reflecting the ills and the fears of society at whatever given time it's coming out. Truly the case with Candyman, truly the case also, as it's pointed out here, with urban legends. They have a root in something, whether it's like a morality tale or it's an issue like this one of racism and how racism holds people down and forces them into, and can force them into a terrible systemic situation where they're less socioeconomically advantaged or very much socioeconomically disadvantaged, I should say. With the way the film is set up, it's a white couple who is fearful of Candyman in the beginning, being Ted Raimi and the woman that ends up getting killed first when the story is being told. They're fearful of Candyman, but invoke his name to end up incurring his wrath. It highlights white fears of urban people who are black, which has been perpetuated by news and entertainment for a long time. That is something we've come to understand now, is that it's definitely been skewed in the news and in entertainment, how you view white people versus how you view people who are black. And I say people who are black, and I don't say African American, because I also want to include people who may be first generation from another country who happen to be living in the United States and are not necessarily U.S. citizens at this point. So I kind of want to be able to encompass the most people possible. That's why I say black and not African American. It's also something that was taught to me when I was in college from one of my professors from Ghana. That was his philosophy on using the term black as opposed to African American, and it kind of stuck with me a little bit. So anyway, yes. Already talked about that. At one point, Helen talks about people in Cabrini Green living their lives afraid of a mythical figure, Candyman. It's real for the residents, though, because Candyman is born from racism, which still haunts and oppresses people who are black. Helen's perspective of them being afraid of something that doesn't exist is like people who are white dismissing racism as non-existent, which actually still happens today. This is kind of going to the heart of showing, brushing off this urban legend, saying, oh, it's all mythical, it's not really happening. I don't know why you're living your life this way like it is real, because it's not real. I've seen that in my own life of people kind of dismissing racism as a thing. There is still racism. Yes, there definitely still is racism. But you do have people who are like, oh, racism's not really a problem anymore. And that's what's going on with this situation of Helen kind of first approaching it as, why, this is crazy. They think that this is really an issue. I think that's kind of the comparison that's going on there. Helen thinking she can go into Cabrini Green and solve the issue of Candyman lore represents a history of white intellectuals thinking they know best for another race of people, and they can fix all of their issues even without any buy-in from those people. Because Helen literally is inserting herself into Cabrini Green and this investigation of whether or not Candyman lore is real or not. Nobody asked her to do that. She just said, I'm going to do this. And that kind of is a metaphor, in a sense, for the issue of, white intellectuals continually inserting themselves into other races and all their other cultures' lives, and just saying, oh, I don't think you know what you need in life or how to fix things in your community. I think we have a better idea. And not even asking, like not even getting input as to, do you want me involved in this? Do you want to hear from me? Is it okay if I come and poke around? Like, and that's what's going on with Helen. She's literally just going in and inserting herself because she has the privilege to do so, because she's white, because she's upper class, because she's intellectual, and she's, going to school. Or no, wait, she's not going to school at that point. She's married to a teacher. She's doing something journalistically. So yeah. Candyman tells Candyman tells Helen he needs to keep her from convincing people he's a myth so he can maintain his power. Since he represents death from an act of racism, this shows Candyman as racism holding power over the residents of Cabrini Green and convincing them that how their lives are is just what they should accept. That's just the way it is. And I think that is a strong parallel going on there. That, as I was saying before, like that, white people for the most part are looking at Candyman and saying, oh, this is lore, it's a myth, it's not real. But the people who are living at Cabrini Green are saying, yes, it is real, and we are living our lives this way because we're not trying to upset Candyman. We're not trying to have Candyman kill us. So it really is the acceptance and denial of racism as an actual problem, especially because, as I said before, Candyman was created from an act of racism. So he symbolizes racism in the film from my perspective. Obviously, all of this is just my personal experience with watching the film. And like I said, there are probably many people who have different takes on it, and that's why you can put your comments down there. Once Candyman has framed Helen, multiple times I should say, she's resigned to a life she no longer has any control over. She experiences what the residents of Cabrini Green do. She's imprisoned she's imprisoned for the crimes that she didn't commit, but she was set up for. And the residents are imprisoned by their socioeconomic position in life, which is imposed by systemic racism. Once again, Candyman, you know, being a symbol for racism, or the act of the creation of Candyman being a symbol of racism. There's a reference to gentrification early in the film, which, if you don't know what gentrification is, basically gentrification is when a section of a city or town is mainly lower socioeconomically, and then developers come in and kind of kick everyone out or evict everyone, take over, build super expensive or at least significantly more expensive buildings and living and other things to make it better. And it basically prices the people who used to live there out of being able to live there anymore, just pushing them out. So that's what gentrification is. It's when that happens. So there's a reference to gentrification early in the film when Helen tells Bernadette that where she lives used to be a housing project. Gentrification pushed people at a low socioeconomic level to Cabrini Green, which kept them isolated from the rest of the city. That's actually something I was reading about in the article I was reading on Cabrini Green, is that one of the biggest issues is, as a housing project, it really walled everyone living there off from the rest of Chicago in many ways. You know, jobs-wise, what's available to them, you know, everyone there was lower socioeconomic. And then they didn't have good things. You know, like I said, the building was poorly built in the first place. Maintenance was not maintained very well, and it was a failure of the state, basically. Well, probably more of the city than the state. Yeah, the bureaucracy. So that's all I have to say about Candyman. I knew this would be a longer video. I'm sorry that it was so long, but this is definitely one of those films that deserves a super deep dive, and it is really dense. There's a lot there to talk about, obviously, because I talked for over half an hour about it. So yeah, but like I said, would love to hear your opinions on the film. Also, if you did see the newer one, don't spoil anything for me, but do tell me if you know, did you like it more? Did you like it about the same? Do you like it less? But also why? Don't just say I think it sucked or I think it was great. Tell me why, without spoiling it for me, because like I said, I will eventually watch it. But go ahead and put your comments down there. Once again, please do me a favor, hit subscribe if you haven't already. That's your way to repay me. It's quick, it's painless, it costs you no money at all, and it really does keep me motivated, especially when I put work in, like, for a video like this. It was a lot. Hard thinking, reading, yeah, a lot went into this. And like I said, the disclaimer, you know, I'm a white male, so my perspective is different on this. There are probably things I'm not seeing that someone else could see, which is why I want to hear other perspectives. Also, just the fact that these are my opinions. This is what I personally see in the film. People may see different things. People may experience different things. And that's also why I want to hear from people in the comments. So regardless, thank you very much for taking your time to check this out. And until next time, keep it brutal.